Cubans take the streets in massive anti-government protests. Thousands of Cubans took the streets Sunday in protest of the country's food shortages and high prices amid the coronavirus pandemic. The anti-government protests in the capital of Havana lasted about 2.5 hours before it was broken up when a few protesters tossed cobblestones at police, leading to several arrests. We are fed up with the queues and shortages. That's why I'm here, one middle-aged protester said. The Communist Party is suffering from its worst economic crisis in decades and has recently seen a surge in coronavirus cases. Cuba President Miguel Díaz-Canel undermined Sunday's demonstrations while visiting the small town of San Antonio de los Banos, which has been plagued by power shortages. I'm going to continue. The next story is from The Independent. Cuba protests spread to Miami as president threatens battles in the streets. By the way, I landed in Miami last night, okay? When I was in, the Miami airport, when this was happening.
MIA.
Everybody, traffic was the worst I've ever seen. Flags everywhere, honking the horn. You see it all over the place, right?
Well, the Miami airport is just outside of Little Havana.
Of course,
so,
45 minutes away, yeah. So thousands of Miami joined protests in solidarity with the Cuban people rallying against the government because of food and vaccine shortages and rising prices. Cubans in the thousands also protested on Sunday against the government of President Communist Party. We know that. The country is also struggling with the sanctions imposed by the Trump administration after President Barack Obama tried to normalize relations with the country. Sunday's protest was one of the biggest anti-government demonstrations in memory, the Associated Press writes. And the last story I'll read is the following. Cubans denounce misery in the biggest protest in decades. The rallies, widely viewed as astonishing for a country that limits dissent, were set off by economic crisis, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so here's a New York Times tweet. Can you pull up the New York Times tweet? Pull up the New York Times tweet, which to me it's very, very folks. I don't know if you saw this or not. Did you see the New York Times tweet?
No, I'd like to see it though.
Here's a New York Times tweet. Tell me what you think about this. Shouting freedom and other anti-government slogans. Let me read that to you again. Shouting freedom and other anti-government slogans. Hundreds of Cubans took the streets in the cities around the country on Sunday to protest food and medicine shortages and a remarkable eruption of discontent not seen in nearly 30 years. Proper English. I'm Middle Eastern. English is my fifth language. So I took EFL, not even ESL, because ESL is second language. EFL is fifth language, right? Okay.
Never even heard of that.
I haven't either.
Shouting freedom and other anti-government slogans.
Yeah.
Does that mean the word freedom is a form of an anti-government slogan?
Yes.
Is that how I'm reading it
You're
correctly,
reading it 100%
or is my English off?
No, that is correct.
So
And
New York
look at the
Times
source.
is saying freedom is an anti-government
yes, that's
slogan?
what they're saying. Of course that's what they're saying.
Yeah,
yes.
well, the other thing that they were shouting for the roof, they were saying "Libertad, libertad." Have you ever seen Scarface?
Yeah.
That's what they're shouting.
Cuba Libre.
No, the only thing.
And the other thing they were saying was, "We are not afraid. We are not afraid. Freedom, freedom, freedom."
Yeah, but what
so
I'm asking you the following question
I'm
here.
saying yes. The answer is yes. Now, the only thing
Since
open
when
to
has freedom been
the
anti-government?
only thing open to interpretation is: are
this
they
government.
referencing Cuba, where it's a communist country and freedom does mean anti-government, or is that the New York Times philosophy in general? Because that is not an act. Every word is thought out very, very clearly through there. Okay.
But so hold on, what's your point with that, Pat? I'm feeling. To
He's
understand.
saying the New York Times is saying freedom is anti-government, and that they're going to transpose that same thought process here, which is what essentially they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, New York Times is saying the word freedom is anti-government.
Anti-Cuban government.
No. And other anti-government slogans. The word freedom is an anti-government slogan. Since when has the word freedom been a bad word to use? Since when has that been like, hey, any of this stuff, like today, watch this, your question for you. If today you see somebody with a truck with an American flag on, automatically, are they Democrats or Republicans?
Republican.
Why? Why?
Yeah, they're more patriotic.
But why though? I'm confused.
I've asked myself that same question. Why
I don't get that.
Being Democrat is somehow seen as less patriotic.
Yeah, but what I'm trying to tell you is Democrats are afraid to carry their flags. Because when you drive down, like when you drive down a house, if you see an American flag, most people are going to say that house is what? It's a Republican house. Yeah. Why though? Why are Republicans proud to represent their flag and Democrats cannot represent their flag?
Because
why is that? Why is it patriotic to say freedom is good? Why is it such an offensive word nowadays that New York Times, who's got the kind of influence they got to say, hey, freedom is an anti-government slogan? What are you talking about? What are we talking about here? I escaped Iran to be here. For what? For freedom. You know, when I was in Germany at a refugee camp, you know who was there? People from Albania, people from Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia doesn't even exist today. Yugoslavia, Poland, Czechoslovakia. Now it's not even Czechoslovakia. All these other places.
All countries that were under Soviet regime.
Yeah, and we were all there. We all had one in common. We were begging for freedom.
Sure.
Everybody was afraid to claim their religion. Everybody was afraid to voice their, everybody was afraid. Everybody wanted this thing called freedom. And today, freedom is an anti-government slogan.
Yeah.
Wow.
You know, 2 weeks ago on the podcast, we were talking about CNN celebrating China's 100-year anniversary of communism. And this ties in with what I'm going to ask you right now. You look at CNN, you look at the New York Times, they're, you know, as Donald Trump used to say, they're failing, right? The failing New York Times. But CNN's ratings speak for themselves. You cannot have a 40% dip in your ratings and not have some sort of economic disaster with a company. They go hand in hand.
Yeah.
So are they being secretly funded by China? I mean, is that where the revenue gap is coming from?
Cuba? The Cuban?
No, I'm talking about liberal media outlets. I'm just wondering, is there
First
a
of all,
pipeline
Cuba
of
is funded by
cash?
China. Just so you know, Cuba is funded by China. China has a chokehold on Cuba. There is a power of China coming in to use Cuba as a platform to that is already one of their chess moves
It
that
fits
they're
their
playing.
profile. That's exactly what they do.
So,
PBD, let me ask you, because maybe
Kai, do you have two instead of one? I need two. I need somebody in their late 30s and somebody in their 20s to give me two perspectives. Go ahead.
Maybe I'm just not understanding this, okay? But in my opinion, and I could be wrong, you're going to probably teach me something as someone who basically had their freedom or rights taken away in Iran.
Yep.
Shouting freedom, libertad, or against the government in Cuba, anti-government, anti-communist, you know, regimes.
Yeah.
Why is that a bad thing? I'm not understanding whether this was the New York Times, New York Post, Washington Post. I'm not understanding that.
Why is it a bad thing?
Yeah, like shouting freedom while you're under a communist regime is not a bad thing.
I don't think it is. What I'm saying is a bad thing. The fact that New York Times categorically puts the word freedom as an anti-government slogan.
Anti-Cuban government.
It said anti-government slogan.
But they're talking about Cuba.
It's not about. But what do you mean talking about Cuba? It says
the whole story is about Cuba.
Let me ask you, bring that tweet back up. Are you sincerely telling me you don't see messaging in the title? You don't see any, you don't read into this messaging?
But that's why I asked the question for you to inform me.
Well, then
I'm thinking shouting freedom and other government slogans, hundreds of Cubans took to the streets. So I'm thinking this is a Cuban story. I'm not reading into it
I get that.
this is American.
You know what they could have done? They could have done... They could have done shouting many other things, but saying freedom and other anti-government slogans. Other anti-government slogans. What is wrong with shouting freedom?
Nothing.
But New York Times is calling that an anti-government slogan.
But it is an anti-government slogan in Cuba.
You cannot. It's okay. So in New York
They're
Times,
protesting
let me
the
ask you a question. Let me ask you a
government,
question. Is New York Times anti-government or pro-government?
I guess they're pro-government.
You guess they're pro-government? What do you mean you guess they're pro-government?
I don't have like the strong opinion on New York Times. I think this is a story about Cuba. I'm not reading into it.
Oh, buddy.
But that's why I asked the question,
But that's the problem.
That's why I asked the question. I'm not reading into it further.
That's the problem with the fact that you don't realize the power of wordsmithing. Let me tell you, there was a movie called Flash of Genius. You ever seen the movie Flash of Genius? It's the story about the intermittent, windshield wiper. The guy that invents the intermittent windshield wiper. If you've never seen this, you got to watch this movie. Okay, he's invents it. He goes, presents it to Ford. Ford steals it from him. They say he didn't come up with it. We came up with it. He shows it to Chrysler, Ford, to everybody. They take it. He gets nothing for it. Damn. He goes against them for years, loses his marriage, loses his kids, loses everything. Eventually, years later, he gets paid $28 million. Wow. And everybody had to officially say that this man invented the intermittent windshield wiper. He represents himself because he has no money. He's so broke. And he gets up there and he says, Ford says to create the intermittent, windshield wiper, all you need is 4 pieces. You need this, you need this, you need that, you need this. Meaning Ford's trying to say it's not a big deal. He didn't invent anything unique. Mm-hmm. He says, you're right, but I got a question for you. I'm going to use a few words. Tell me if you've ever used these words in your vocabulary. You ever used the word success? Yes. You ever used the word high? Yes. You ever used the word happy? You ever used the word the? You ever used the word there? Like, yeah, where are you going with this? He says, how come you never wrote a best-selling book, just like he puts the book up, which is the all-time best-selling book of all time. It sold, hundreds of millions of copies. How come you've never written a best-selling book? All the words in this book are words you know. But the problem with you is you don't know how to put the words in the right order to become a bestseller. The author here did. What I did is I know how to put those 4 items together that anybody could have done, and I invented it. I own the rights to it. They need to pay up, and they need to tell, because you've cost me my marriage, my family, my kids. They need to say it publicly. There is power in wordsmithing. New York Times has a lot of influence, and they know how to put words together to manipulate the agenda they're trying to impose to the average American voter that doesn't read into it, and they say freedom, anti-government slogan. And they say, yeah, you know what? Freedom. Yeah, people who say freedom, people who say freedom, people who say freedom, they're probably Republicans. No, freedom is why America is the greatest nation on the planet today. It could still change. Right. Freedom is the reason why America is so special. Freedom of speech, freedom of enterprise, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion. I can go on with all these different freedoms that they provide you, but now it's an anti-government slogan.
Let me just say this. As a writer, that is 100% part of the New York Times messaging. That is what they do. It's subtle, but it's consistent and it's constant. They use the word freedom as an anti-government slogan. If they were doing what you think they were doing, because it's a story of Cuba, they should have said shouting freedom and other phrases in Cuba that might be interpreted as anti-government, comma, go on with it. But they didn't do that. So that's the exact...
That was like a 50 words rather than 4 words.
Yeah, but there's no limit on Twitter now. But anyway, that's exactly what they did. They made that... They do it all the time.
So if you enjoyed this little short segment from the podcast that we did, here's another short segment to watch. Or if you want to see the entire podcast, click over here. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.